acknowledges that this event takes place on the lands of the Blackfoot people and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, and we pay respect to their past, present, and future cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. SACPA commits to assist reconciliation efforts by raising awareness of the ways past and present injustices can be reconciled.
Our speaker today is Kattie Aurora, and she will be talking about her experience as a trans individual. So everyone, please join me in welcoming her.
Okay, I think that should be good. Lower it a little bit. Okay. My presentation today is called Being Trans is Amazing, So Why All the Hate? It explores the highs of trans joy, the lows of being a scapegoated minority, and the history of reactionary hatred against us to help explain the era of emerging fascism that we are currently living through. I'll begin with a brief introduction to let you know a little bit more about who I am. I'm Kattie Aurora, and I transed my gender well over a decade ago while studying rocket science at Carleton University in Ottawa. I graduated in 2016 and started my career in engineering, doing a combination of industrial, mechanical, and fluid simulation engineering. I then moved back to Lethbridge to stay with my family after burning out from working in the corporate world. It took time and effort and recovering from my, but I've recovered from my burnout and I'm getting back to living. I've gotten involved with several local community organizations since returning to Lethbridge, and it's truly helped me with my recovery. And SACPA is one of those organizations. It's been really great being here. When I started my transition, I initially identified as a trans woman. Since then, my conception of gender has expanded, and I now identify explicitly as agender. I'm cool with people using whatever pronouns they want to use to address me, as long as you're not being an asshole about it. But I typically refer to myself using they, them pronouns. I've included my contact info on this slide if anyone wants to get in contact with me after the presentation or to request a copy of the presentation or for any other reason. So with that, we can get going. In Chapter 1, doesn't being trans suck? It's understandable that you would think so. Discussions of trans people in the media and in medical research typically focus on the negative aspects of being trans. In this way, being trans is framed as an unfortunate condition that can fortunately be managed with medical intervention, supportive communities, and human rights legislation. This framing is well-intentioned and born out of empathy. But the persistent negativity bias contributes to our worse than average mental health and feeds into reactionary narratives that we're delusional or predators or are otherwise lying about our lived experiences. There is no shortage of presentations, articles, essays, research papers, memes, and more addressing the challenges we face. So rather than retreading well-worn ground, I'm going to take a different approach and talk about why. Chapter 2, being trans is amazing. I'm going to share a few stories from my life to explain why I love being trans, but before that, we're going to talk a bit about gender euphoria. Gender euphoria emerged from within the trans community as a concept to describe the positive aspects of being trans. We feel it in all kinds of situations, such as when we achieve certain milestones in our transition, like when you get an amazing haircut and we see ourselves as ourselves for the first time, or when we're transitioning within our communities and they accept us, or when we're able to start hormone therapy and receive other forms of gender-affirming care. There's also the day-to-day gender euphoria, the joy that comes living authentically as ourselves. This includes everything from dressing comfortably to working out and even having sex. Experiencing gender euphoria isn't limited to just trans people. Everyone experiences it. The definition is inclusive enough to include common experiences like a woman wearing a men's shirts, short skirts, and declaring, "Man, I feel like a woman." Or a man wearing men's shirts, short skirts, and declaring, "Man, I feel like a man." We aren't just trying to alleviate our gender dysphoria when we transition. We are also trying to move towards gender euphoria. And gender euphoria is the reason why. Chapter 3, I love being trans. The image on this slide is special to me. It's over 13 years old and I can't find the original source for it, but I've had it saved on my computer since before I started transitioning. It's actually one of the things that inspired me to transition in the first place. It helped me realize that transitioning was even possible. I started transitioning in 2012 while I was in university and things were going very poorly for me. I had severe social anxiety to the point where I couldn't attend class or even leave my room most days. As a result, I was failing my classes. I didn't have any friends or social life. I was having a miserable time, and this made it very easy to hate myself and to turn that hatred outwards. I was on the path towards right-wing radicalization and possibly even suicide. I was receiving therapy through the university's on-campus clinic, but it barely helped. Fortunately for me, trans people were starting to become visible in the world through social media. And it is through social media that I found this image along with various articles and essays describing trans people and our lived experiences. I actually still remember the very first article that I ever read about trans people, although it has also been lost to time. I remember it was a BuzzFeed-style quiz with a title something along the lines of, "You'll never believe which of these women are actually men." The trick to the quiz was, of course, that they were all trans women, and thus women. Reading this article and learning that transition was possible ignited something inside me. In very short order, I went from passively coming across trans people on social media to actively seeking out more information. I can also remember the moment I realized that I was trans. I was riding the train into the university, staring out the window, when I came to the inescapable conclusion that I'm trans and I want to transition. After that, things started getting better for me. I had something to live for, something that I truly wanted. I worked up the nerve to tell my therapist that I was trans, which eventually led to me transitioning. Keep in mind that this was in 2012, and the university clinic had no idea how to help me transition. I was only the second trans person that they were even aware of, and I was the first to come to them to start my transition. They had to do a lot of work to figure out what care I needed and how to get it to me. But several months later, I was able to start hormone therapy, and I finally started feeling good about myself. My transition was full of joy and excitement with every milestone, a new adventure to pursue. Things like taking my first dose of hormones, experiencing the effect that they had on my body, training my voice, overcoming my anxiety, joining the campus queer community, making friends, and starting to excel in my classes. I was really starting to finally feel like myself. The gender euphoria I felt vanquished my misery and opened my heart to empathy. It saved me from right-wing radicalization and filled me with determination for the future. Even through the burnout and isolation of the pandemic, one of the things that kept me going was the fact that I love existing in my body. To this day, my life is full of gender euphoria. Hopefully, you've learned a little bit more about why trans people transition and why being trans is so amazing, because now it's time to ask, so why all the hate? There are numerous reasons why trans people are on the receiving end of an expanding torrent of fear and hatred. I can't cover all these reasons, but I will cover the most important, which is that we break the gender binary. To properly explain this, we first need to talk about gender essentialism, which is the belief that there are only two sexes which correspond to a rigid gender binary, and that one's gender is determined by the genitals they are born with. Statements like, men are hardwired to be aggressive, or women are nurturing by nature, or the Bible says Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and even trans women are actually men. These are all examples of gender essentialism. It's the foundation of most modern sexism and transphobia, and it's simply a bad description of our physical reality. If you use it to make predictions about people's behavior, then you will make bad predictions. And to prove this, we can examine how gender roles and stereotypes have changed throughout history and how they vary greatly across cultures. As an example, in medieval European society, women were thought to have far higher sex drives than men, whereas today we generally believe the opposite. We can also look at societies around the world which are matriarchal, which have a fundamentally different view on gender organization. We can also look at societies which have a tradition of a third gender, such as the Hijra of South Asia, or two-spirited people found in North American First Nations societies. Finally, the most relevant to this presentation, we can examine how the existence of trans people proves that the lines between sex and gender are fuzzy and easily crossed. We are unignorable living proof that that sex is not gender and gender is not destiny. So for people who have built their identity around gender essentialism, our existence is intolerable. They have to believe that we are lying about our identity, or that we are faking our identity for some kind of gain or hidden agenda, or that we're simply delusional, because if we're being sincere, if our experiences and identities are valid, then it means that they're wrong about something so fundamental to their own identity and worldview. For a lot of people, they just aren't willing to grapple with this. It's too much for them, and it's so much easier to turn to fear and hatred in Chapter 5. And how does this explain fascism? Does this photo look familiar to any of you? I know it as the iconic Nazi book burning photo. That is, when people talk about the Nazi book burnings and destroying knowledge, this is the photo they will show you. Do you know what books are being burned in this photo? These are books, journals, and other materials that were looted from the Institute of Sexology in Berlin on May 6, 1933. The Nazis declared that they had committed the intellectual garbage of the past to the flames while burning this irreplaceable collection. Let's talk a little bit about the Institute of Sexology. It was founded in 1919 in Berlin by a gay Jewish man named Magnus Hirschfeld. Its stated purpose was to be a place of research, teaching, healing, and refuge that could free the individual from physical ailments, psychological afflictions, and social deprivation. Oh, whoops. The Institute studied gender and sexuality in order to aid and advocate for gay and trans people. It offered gender-affirming care, including hormone therapy, help attaining new gender-affirming IDs, employment for gay and trans people, and in 1931, it performed the first modern sex reassignment surgery. The Institute of Sexology was the first trans clinic. And the Nazis, in typical fascist fashion, hated it. We were among their first victims. Our existence was made illegal, and we were sent to die in concentration camps. Even after World War II, when those camps were liberated, gay and trans prisoners were made to serve out their sentences. We were not liberated, along with the Nazis' other victims. We were targeted for the reasons I described on the previous slide, and for the same reasons that gay people were also targeted by the Nazis. Our existence was incompatible with the pure society that they were trying to enforce, and we were an easy target to mobilize hatred against. Chapter 6. Okay, but what about modern fascism? Fascist rhetoric relies on fear-mongering, casting a villainized other as a threat that must be purged from society. In Nazi Germany, gay and trans people, along with the disabled, Jews, leftists, and other minority groups were targeted in this way. Fascists weaponize fear and hatred to consolidate political power for themselves. So they will claim that every problem in society is the fault of their target du jour. They will claim that their authoritarian actions are necessary to protect us from them. We can see this pattern clearly in the USA under the Trump/MAGA regime, where trans people are being targeted as this villainous other. Since taking office, the Trump regime has issued 5 executive orders directly targeting trans people, has directed the Justice Department to ban trans people from owning guns, froze funding for research on trans people, deleting existing web pages and health data sets referencing trans people. And additionally, several Republican states have enacted additional measures to roll back trans rights, limit access to healthcare and government service, and to restrict trans people from public life. I want to call particular attention to the deleted health data sets, because we literally just talked about the Nazi book burnings. Deleting this digital data is the modern equivalent to book burnings. It isn't as flashy, but the end result is precisely the same. Knowledge and research about trans people is gone forever. Trump/MAGA are also attempting to paint trans people as dangerous criminals who are prone to mass shootings. They have been publicly claiming that every mass shooter is trans immediately after the shooting and before any information about the shooter is known. It's extremely important to note here that there is no epidemic of shootings and other violence by trans people. This is simply a made-up lie. In every case, the message that Trump/MAGA are sending is clear. Trans people are the enemy, we must be eradicated. The world's problems are all our fault, and you have to trust them and give them more authoritarian power in order to deal with the menace that is trans people. Chapter 7, and what about here in Alberta? Canada is one of the best countries on earth to be trans in. We have strong legal protections, good access to gender-affirming care, and a supportive population. This is something that we should all take pride in. Still, the rot of American fascism is creeping across the globe, and we have not been spared. The UCP has recently passed 3 bills aimed at restricting trans rights. These are the Education Amendment Act of 2024. This bill treats children like the property of their parents, and thus opens them up to abuse from unsupportive or bigoted parents. It holds their identity hostage to their parents and prevents them from claiming their autonomy as a person. This is a violation of children's rights, as per the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Canada is a signatory. They've also passed the Health Statutes Amendment Act. This bans trans youth from taking puberty blockers until age 16, at which point most of the changes experienced during puberty will have already occurred. These changes will likely then have to be addressed later in life through surgical interventions or other medical care. Puberty blockers are completely safe, and their effects are entirely reversible when administered properly at the onset of puberty. They are given to trans youth so that they have time to truly understand their gender identity without having to worry about the permanent changes caused by puberty. If it turns out that they are trans, then they can continue with the typical hormone replacement as they get older. Otherwise, if it turns out that maybe they thought they were trans and it turns out actually no, they're not, then they can simply stop taking the puberty blockers and they will continue with a normal puberty. There are no ill effects to puberty blockers as a treatment. The remainder of this bill bans hormone treatment until age 16 and surgeries until age 18. And I will note that this actually doesn't change anything because it's already standard practice not to administer hormone treatment until age 16, and there isn't anywhere in Canada where you can go to get surgeries before age 18. If you've heard the UCP saying that they're trying to ban trans kids from getting surgeries or anything along those lines, that was literally not a thing that happened in Canada already. This is them just posturing for political gain. The final bill that they introduced is the Fairness and Safety in Sports Act. This forces trans youth out of school sports to appease bigots. Trans people do not have an advantage over cis people in sports and athletics. This has been studied and proven out multiple times. In fact, a 2024 study by the International Olympic Committee found that trans people are actually at a slight disadvantage compared to cis people when it comes to sports and athletics. And this is consistent with all of the other research that has already performed that shows that while there may be a few slight differences that are technically measurable in certain aspects, that these differences are very small and are largely inconsequential. We simply do not have the advantage that you will hear people claim that we have. And as one of the very rare trans people who actually does sports, and like I go to the gym 5 times a week, I ride my bike literally everywhere. I'm exactly the kind of person that people are afraid about competing in women's sports. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that when I go to the gym, my performance is honestly fairly middling. There are women at the gym I go to who simply leave me in the dust. I work out with one of the top CrossFit athletes in Canada. Her name is Kattie. She is simply stronger, faster, more fit than I could ever hope to be. The entire claim that trans people are somehow advantaged over cis people and that we need to protect sports from, women's sports in particular, from trans women competing is simply a claim that is born out of bigotry. It is not founded in reality. It's also worth noting that this bill forces every girl and woman in the province to prove that they are not trans in order to play sports in school. This is a massive violation of privacy and a perfect example of the misogynistic practice of sex testing, which has long been used as a tool to punish insufficiently feminine women in sports. Men are not required to undergo the same types of testing and are not banned from competing for having characteristics that fall outside the masculine norm. This bill treats women as being fundamentally inferior to men and thus in need of protection from anyone who is too masculine. Egal Canada and the Skipping Stone Foundation have launched legal challenges to overturn these bills and protect trans rights. I am hopeful that these challenges will succeed, but the UCP has threatened to use the notwithstanding clause of our Constitution to force these bills through if they are found unconstitutional. The Saskatchewan Party has already used this tactic to pass similar anti-trans legislation in Saskatchewan. I will also advocate that if the UCP is willing to use the notwithstanding clause to restrict trans rights, then our federal government should respond by using their power of disallowance. The last time disallowance was used in Canada was in 1961, but it remains a valid constitutional power, just the same as a notwithstanding clause. Better yet, I would advocate that we amend our Constitution to completely remove the notwithstanding clause and to ensure that our human rights are not subject to the whims of premiers. Ultimately, the UCP is enacting the same strategy of fear-mongering to consolidate political power that we see in the USA and other fascist regimes around the world. They haven't taken things quite as far, but these three bills are a worrying sign that we are headed in that direction, especially if you consider the Alberta separatist movement that they have been cozying up to. And that's a wrap, folks. I hope you learned a little bit more about the experiences, more about the trans experience and the rise of fascism in the modern age. Please enjoy this picture of my cat and feel free to ask any questions you may have. Right on time, too.
Right on time. All right, see if I can. All right, thank you, Katie, so much for taking the time to come and talk with us and share your experiences. We will be hosting a Q&A session shortly. For anyone who would like to ask questions, we ask that you line up against the wall here, or you can write it down if you don't feel comfortable speaking in front of everyone. That's okay, too. I ask that you write clearly because I am only human and I can only read so well. But in the meantime, I would like to thank all of the sponsors of the SACPA. Your contributions are what make it possible for this organization to provide a weekly and unique community forum for people to hear and discuss varied perspectives on current issues. Thanks to LSCO, who have provided this room free of charge, always appreciated. If you are especially thankful, by all means, try out their diner, it's great. Thanks to the University of Lethbridge for their ongoing support, the Lethbridge Herald and other media for covering topics such as this and for their support. And a thank you to Rogers Community TV for facilitating recording of our sessions available on TV and the sacpa.ca archives. Of course, thank you to all of our members as well. If you would like to join or renew your membership for $30, you are free to speak to any of the people. The fella in the fascism sucks shirt back there, he might be able to lead you in the right direction. This will also permit you to vote in annual general meetings. If you have any comments or suggestions, there's a suggestion box where we would love to hear from you. There's also donations that we collect, which help to provide finances that make opportunities like this possible to everyone. Such opportunities include the presentation next week by Dawn Leahy, who will be speaking on the topic of what happens when a performing arts center becomes the cornerstone of community growth. Take note that in the paper it says that it's on the 28th. That is incorrect. It's actually the 25th, but you all know the drill. It's on Thursday. So at this time, anyone with questions, please, we ask that you come up, state your name before asking, and please remember that keep questions brief to allow other people the opportunity to speak, and that we are to be mindful and respectful in any discourse that there is.
Good afternoon. My name is Stan. And in 2013, I was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. Part of my hormone treatment included Lupron, biclutamide, and Eligard. Within days, my testosterone vanished, and according to my health team, I'm 99% female. And so despite this radical gender transformation, I have not been able to find any support services, to help me with that transition. I was just wanting to find out if there was some way that your group can combine with my network, to develop a program that would affect millions of men that have experienced, the same thing that I'm going through. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, Stan. It is very important to remember that the healthcare that he needs is gender-affirming care, and it is very much the exact same kind of healthcare that trans men who are transitioning from female to male would require. You would take a testosterone suppressor, and you would then, you would take an estrogen suppressant and then supplement with additional testosterone. When there are bans against trans healthcare that make it harder to get this kind of hormone therapy, it negatively affects everyone, not just trans people. It makes it harder for people like Stan to get the healthcare they need. And even within trans healthcare, there, I think, is still a little bit of a misconception that trans healthcare is something special or unique, and that cis people do not need this same kind of healthcare. But as I said, the healthcare that we receive is the exact same kind of healthcare that someone like Stan needs. It's all gender-affirming care, and it is all something that our medical system should provide. Now, I don't really have a trans organization of myself that I could work with. However, there are a number of trans organizations and resource centers. I've linked a few of them on this page of the presentation. If you do want to learn more about being trans, or you're looking for resources to help with transitioning, or even just like in Stan's case, if you need help with gender affirming care, I would recommend that you check these groups out.
My name is Klaus Jericho, and I want to thank SACPA to make this amazing talk possible. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Katie. All my life, I've been trying to study life, and I really got at it after I retired. And I've learned just recently from the scientific journals that we have genes which give us our sexual landmarks. But we have different genes also which express our sexual traits. And we all are like that. There's no difference. Some have more of those, some have more of those. The famous bell curve in biology applies. So to make all these differences and to express hate and misunderstanding is only based in our ignorance. In our ignorance. And there is no excuse anymore, because that information is out there now. All we have to do is learn it and apply it.
Thank you for the comments. And it is very, very true. If you look across nature, there are all kinds of different ways how sex is expressed. I believe you sent me, just before the presentation started, an article that dealt with birds. I'm not a biologist, but that is something that I was vaguely aware of, but I still very appreciate the article, and I will read it, because birds don't have XX and XY chromosomes. They have a different set of chromosomes that results in very different sexual expressions compared to what we are used to in mammal species. And even across the animal kingdom in general, you can find no shortage of examples of species where given members of a species might change sex partway through their lives in response to reproductive pressures. And okay. You could have an entire other presentation on the wild and wacky world of sex and gender in the animal kingdom, so I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much for your comment.
Hi, my name is Terry Shillington. And I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation, and I admire people who can speak from personal experience so powerfully. I'm a person who likes definitions, and I find the word trans is used in a lot of different contexts, from Florida to Edmonton and in between. And I wonder, I understand trans to mean people who begin with one gender experience and want to transition to another. Is that your understanding, or how would you phrase it?
Well, thank you for the question, Terry. It's a very good question because the history of terminology that has been used to describe trans people has changed and varied quite a bit over history. If we go back to here, where I was talking about the Institute of Sexology and Magnus Hirschfeld. He was actually the person who coined the term transsexual originally. He also coined the term transvestite, and he used these terms in a different way than they would come to be understood by the mid-century or even in the modern context. In general, there has been a shift towards having fewer terms to describe maybe specific types of trans people. Like you could have like transvestite, transsexual, transgender. These are all terms that have been used. Typically today, you will hear simply transgender, or as I used, simply trans. And the word trans itself simply it's actually a prefix. It means on the other side. Think of, for example, a transatlantic flight where you are flying from one side of the Atlantic to the other side of the Atlantic. And also as a note, the word cis, as in cisgender, simply means on the same side. If you took a cis-Atlantic flight, that would mean you're taking a flight that starts on one side of the Atlantic Ocean and ends on the same side of the Atlantic Ocean. It's not a word that gets quite as much usage outside of science, but just for context, in case anyone was wondering. For me personally, I typically use trans to describe anyone who wants to have a different gender than the one they started off with, that they were assigned at birth. In that way, it's a fairly flexible term that encompasses people who start off with who might start off being gendered as male, and then who transition to a binary female or feminine identity. It also describes people like myself who were initially gendered male, but have since come to, in my case, through my particular story, I transitioned originally to be to female, and I've since come to think of myself as a gender, but the term trans still applies to me because my gender is different from the one I started off with. Yeah, it's a very, getting into the etymology and the history of these words is interesting, but it's a good question. Thank you very much.
If I can just close the comment, I think the hatred is baffling and hard to explain except by one simple experience, and that is that the things we don't understand, we tend to fear, and that's unfortunate.
Yes, thank you, and that is a very good point.
Okay, I'm short. Okay, I have one really quick comment and then one question. So my comment, speaking to the situation for the first gentleman that spoke up. Oh, sorry, my name, I'm Deanne. So speaking to the gentleman who first came up, my understanding of, like, your explanation of that, great. My understanding of the legislation is actually they are specifically removing the ability for, like, hormone replacement therapy for people wanting to switch their gender. So it's actually very, very targeted. And so I think that's an important point for people to know, that it's not, it's targeted, period, plain and simple. Question, so as an ally, what can we do?
Okay, thank you, Diane, for the comment and the question. You are correct about, if we flip back to here, where we are talking about the Health Status Amendment Act. There is, because I was looking at this right before I came here. The way the bill currently works is there is an exception for people who are currently on hormone therapy as teenagers to continue their treatment. It's just new people are being disallowed from starting puberty blockers. And so the way this would work in an ideal world is at around age 12 or 13, if someone suspects that they are trans and that transition might be right for them, at that point they would go to their family doctor and they would be prescribed puberty blockers at the onset of puberty. There would be no medication or surgery or anything before that point. It's simply that once this person is starting puberty, they would be able to take puberty blockers. They would then continue that regime of puberty blockers up until they were about age 16, at which point that they would then be able to start taking cross-sex hormones in order to trigger the puberty of the gender they align with. After 2 or so years of that, at no sooner than age 18, that person could then be referred to surgical interventions, things like top surgery or a bottom surgery, which would be, for example, top surgery for someone transitioning from female to male would involve the removal of their breasts. However, if that person was on an appropriate regime of puberty blockers and then testosterone, they would not have any breasts to remove. It's important to mention that. The way the bill currently works is it's fairly targeted at people in that age group from the beginning of puberty to age 16, where it simply bans those people from being able to take puberty blockers. For people who are 16 or 17 or older, the bill does allow them to start hormone therapy, assuming they have the appropriate references from their family doctor and a psychiatrist. However, this is already kind of the status quo, right? Like, it really is not the case where children are being prescribed hormones or getting surgery. This is simply fear-mongering, right? The way it would work is, as I said, you take puberty blockers at the onset of puberty, and then you wait until you're about 16 or so, and then you start your cross-hormone therapy. And then at age 18, you could then look, if it's something you want, at surgical options. Okay, sorry. And for your question, what can we do? As I advocated for, we should pressure the federal government to, if the UCP is willing to force this legislation through with the use of the notwithstanding clause, it is within the power of the federal government to disallow that. This isn't something that the federal government has done since 1961, so it's something that's sort of outside of living memory. I mean, maybe some of y'all were around the last time this was used, but it's not really a feature of modern Canadian politics. It's also something where, maybe understandably, if the federal government did this, the UCP would raise about how the federal government is trampling on their rights to trample other people's rights, right? the other thing we could also do, especially because the UCP has actually been recently recommending that we open up our Constitution and amend it in certain ways. If they do that, well, one, I would not trust the UCP to amend our Constitution, but two, it's something where we should be able to push and publicly advocate for the notwithstanding clause to be removed. The entire reason the notwithstanding clause even exists within our Constitution is to allow the government to trample on our human rights and to restrict them for political reasons. That's basically every single time in our history that the notwithstanding clause has been used, it has been used to restrict people's rights. So it's a very bad, horrible, horrible, horrible feature of our Constitution that, well, like I said, it results in our rights being subject to the whims of premiers who may want to restrict our rights for political gain. Outside of big fancy constitutional changes, there's also the kind of more boring answers, things like voting for parties that will actually uphold people's human rights, which is typically not going to be conservatives. There's the work of learning about trans people, other marginalized groups, learning about the history of like we went over here, things like the Nazi book burnings and how those are directly relevant to modern trans experiences, right? Just arming yourself with the knowledge and the empathy to fight back against the hatred and bigotry. And yeah, I mean, if you're able to donate to local charity organizations like the ones that I listed as part of my presentation, that's always a good option. And just being kind, being empathetic, understanding that maybe you do not know everything, and people being different from you is okay, right? It's always an opportunity to learn something new and to expand your horizons.
Thanks very much, Katie. My name is Ian Hurdle. I have two comments. One is about the biological bell curve, and that is if you put female and males, they're not two separate curves. They overlap 90%. So there's not a lot of separation. The second thing is, over 50 years ago, I worked in a gender dysphoria clinic, and I would say the changes in what our knowledge is sort of like what the computers were like that to the current computers. So my question's kind of in the sky. In some countries, they mandate that 30% or more of the legislatures, people in the legislature, are female. I would say in an ideal situation, maybe it's 50-50. How would we donate those people to cover all our population so they're represented?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And maybe just to address your comments, what you said is very true. If you actually look at the difference between men and women in sports, for example, it's not like men have like twice the level of performance. It usually is on the order of a 10% increase. Right now, at the very, very, very elite level, that 10% can be fairly significant. However, as the research shows, if you are on an appropriate regime of hormone therapy, then, well, basically, that difference in performance comes from the hormones you have in your body and the effects that they have on your body. If you suppress your testosterone and take supplemental estrogen, that over time, you will come to have the body that reflects that. In my case, for example, it was extraordinarily evident as soon as I started taking testosterone suppressants that my strength just dropped. And things that I used to be able to do, like opening jars or carrying things around the house, became a lot more difficult very, very quickly. Like literally over the span of a few months, I noticed a massive reduction in my strength. And even with my current, like I go to the gym 5 times a week, I do strength training, I do cardio, I do it all. And like my performance is on par with the women that I go to the gym with who work out about as often as I do. And it is, I mean, there are certainly some men I am stronger than, just because, you know, I work out, not every man does, right? But I actually wrote an entire big, long letter to the University of Alberta board talking about how they should respond to the Fairness in Sports Act. And it's a little bit fresh in my mind, especially considering I am one of like the 10 trans people in Alberta that this legislation is even aimed at, right? It's a little bit personal, and I could spend quite a bit of time talking about it, but oh, sorry, I've actually forgotten your question while I was talking about legislature. Oh, yes. Yes, so personally, I am not a fan of quotas in order to mandate that like a certain amount of the population must be represented in like legislatures or on boards of companies, things like that. I think it is a band-aid solution at best that ignores the root cause problem, which is that sexism and other forms of bigotry are still endemic in our society. And the result of that is there are simply fewer people from these marginalized groups who are able to rise to that level because like, we are still in many ways being held back. Now, there has been very significant changes on this front over the years. It isn't anywhere near as bad as, say, the 1950s, for example, where you would expect 0 women to be, or other minority groups, to be in these sorts of positions of power. But it is still something that we struggle with. There is still this bias that for example, if you have a married couple, the woman, even though she might be working full time, is still often expected to take care of all of the household chores, which occupies her time. It prevents her from being able to go out into the world and to maybe get on the boards of things like SOCPA here or other organizations. Meanwhile, her husband, who doesn't have to worry about this domestic labor, is a lot more free to expand his career, to take on these kind of supplementary roles that might allow for various forms of horizontal career progression. It's a little bit tricky to then say, like, how do you deal with this systemic problem that we have been chipping away at for, well over a century at this point, right? Like, if we had the solutions to just fix things, probably be fixed. But I would say that the solution is to keep working at it, right? We still need to be mindful that we live in an imperfect society, and there are still improvements that we can make to make our society more fair and equitable for everyone. And especially as we make progress on this, we do see that more people from these minority groups are getting out into the world, and it is having an impact. This, I think, is also a big part of the reason why there has been such a backlash against the feminist movement and various minority right groups from the reactionary right in recent years, is because for a very long time, we were winning. We were making the world fairer and more equitable, and this really upset a lot of the worst people in our society, and now they are taking their anger out on us.
Just to cut in for a moment, our session does conclude at 1 o'clock, so this will be the last question that we're taking today. However,
we could go all the time.
Oh, okay.
We can go now.
Disregard, don't listen to me.
Hello, my name is Knut Petersen. I'm so thankful that Katie came and made SACPA a bit of a home for herself. She's asked them many really good questions over time, and I'm so happy that she agreed to do a presentation. My question would normally be about fascism, but I will actually ask a question about the timing of people discovering that they may not be who they're supposed to be is not necessarily when they're young. There's a very good example of a famous athlete, Bruce Jenner, who won the decathlon at the 1976 Olympics in the male category. He's now a female. Can you tell us a little bit about the timeline of people discovering their actual being?
Well, thank you for the question, Canute. It is a very, very good question, especially, I think, considering our audience. So I don't think the journey of self-exploration ever ends. It's something that I have done my entire life, and it is something that I hope that you all continue throughout your lives. It isn't quite as common for older people to go through the process of transitioning. And there are reasons we can look at that, right? Like, it's just, you've lived your life this way for so long, it becomes harder to maybe admit that there are changes you can make. But you don't have to look very far to find examples of people who are 60, 70, 80, even 90, who do discover later in their life that they are in fact trans and they want to transition. I mean, I always, like, on social media, whenever someone does come out, especially if they are older or from an underrepresented group, it always kind of warms my heart a little bit. It gives me a little bit of that gender euphoria we talked about, to see that there are these people who are still being curious about themselves and willing to try new things and to change in order to better align with who they are as a person. Yeah, and it isn't really something I can speak from with much personal experience, but from reading and understanding some of these stories, what I hear is, you know, for older people, the stories are very similar to those of younger people. It's just that, you know, for younger people, we have been more exposed to this information, especially through the internet and social media, from a younger age. So we are now at a point where we can actually, you know, this knowledge is out in the world. We can expect that people will come across it, right? Like when I was sharing my story of how I found out that I was trans, it really had to do with social media. I came across the stories of trans people on social media, and it sparked curiosity in myself. And I looked into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I related to it. Right? I think that's something that anyone of any age can do.